Welcome back to the show. I'm here with David Tattersall, and he's speaking to us from his home office in Germany, near the world headquarters of Integral, who make FusionReactor, amazing server monitor. And we're going to be looking at what exactly FusionReactor is and how it's different from all the other tools that you could use to monitor your server. And what's exciting in new version 7 that's coming out real soon now, though I can't quite get to a date from David, but you know how it is in software. Yes.
Yeah.
And we're going to also look how FusionReactor works in the cloud and what versions of ColdFusion and Lucy does it work with. And we'll also look at the roadmap for FusionReactor coming up. So lots of exciting stuff. So welcome, David.
Thank you. Thank you, Michael. Thank you for having me on the show.
You are so welcome. So what exactly is FusionReactor? I'm sure there's at least 3 people listening who haven't got a clue what FusionReactor is.
Haven't
want
heard
to
of it.
enlighten them.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, so FusionReactor is the global market leader for performance monitoring on the ColdFusion platform. FusionReactor is a low overhead Java monitor. It gives developers, DevOps, and operations folks sort of a really deep insight into exactly how their applications are performing and how they execute at production runtime. FusionReactor is a hybrid monitor, so it's always on premise. And we've also got a cloud version, so FusionReactor Cloud, so you can extend it into the cloud. So,
how long's it been around, David?
So it's been around since we first launched FusionReactor in 2005. So 12
years. It's nearly a teenager.
Coming up to 12 years, yeah. We've got around 5,000 customers that have taken FusionReactor. We've got at least 25,000+ servers running FusionReactor in production right now.
Wow. And what kind of organizations are using it? You know?
Oh, it's really all kinds of organizations. So we've really got very much across the board. There's a lot of government agencies that are using FusionReactor. We've got a lot of universities, hospitals. There's a lot of Fortune 500 companies, so really large companies that are using the products with hundreds of installations. And then, right down to small developer shops, just with a few developers and, a very simple application. They're all using FusionReactor. So it's very, very much really across the board. The majority of the customers that we've got are in North America. So we've got about 80% of our business in the States, and the rest, probably about 10% in the UK, and the rest dotted around all over the world.
Cool. So is it mostly people running ColdFusion servers, or you also have people who are using it to monitor Java apps?
Yeah.
Or?
So I'd say the majority are ColdFusion servers, although as you're probably aware, FusionReactor is a Java monitor. And certainly since the launch of FusionReactor 6, which was November 2015, we've been pushing more into the Java space. So we've got support now for a number of different Java frameworks like Spring or Struts, and we've definitely seen quite a pickup of non-ColdFusion customers. So we've also been sponsoring a number of the Java-focused events. Last week, we sponsored JAX in Mainz in Germany, which is the largest Java conference in Germany.
Cool. Well, I always appreciate how much you support the different communities. And I know you've sponsored a lot of ColdFusion conferences, so we'll talk more about that later. So how is FusionReactor different from any other Java performance monitoring tool that you might use?
Okay, so basically, if you think, why do you need a performance monitor? And so I've got a few facts about monitoring. The most time-consuming thing that engineers are going to be faced with is basically finding an issue using root cause analysis. That's number one. And number two is actually reproducing it. If you take a look at modern applications today, everything's distributed, everything's service-based. And when something goes wrong in production, trying to reproduce that is an absolute nightmare. So I'm sure you've heard, developers say, oh, we can't reproduce it. It only ever happens in production. And most application or the most problems actually occur in application code and in the database. Those are the two main areas. And it's interesting when I very often ask developers, what is the most used tool that developers use for finding problems in production? And I'll just ask you, Michael, what would you say, what's the most used tool for finding production problems? What would you say that is?
Well, the tool I'd like to use the most is a debugger, but it's hard to use in production,
Okay, yeah, that's a good answer, but it's the most used tool, and it's a bit of a trick question. The most used tool is actually log files. So when I'm asking developers, what do you use in order to find problems in production? Almost always it's log files. And actually, DZone did a recent survey, and I think that they asked 1,000 developers, and over 90% of them gave log files as the number one tool for finding problems in production. And that's closely followed by profilers, debuggers, and memory analyzers. So those are, from a tool perspective, it's profilers, debuggers, and memory analyzers, and the main tool is actually log files. And if you've ever used a log file, and I'm sure you have, to isolate issues, log files are a pain to use. They're difficult. You've got to troll through them. You may not have the log files that you expect. The log files may not contain the correct information that you need. The log files may be out of sync, etc., etc. So there's a lot of problems with log files. And basically, with monitoring, you're trying to do two things. You're trying to identify either some sort of logic or quality issue in your code, or you're trying to identify performance issues. So those are the two main areas. And with FusionReactor, all monitors basically do the same two things. They all measure and they alert. And for me, this is what I call, this is sort of core monitoring capability. And FusionReactor's got all this core capability as well. So it's a very real-time product. So you can see really down to the second sort of exactly what's running on your application. So it's sort of like when you're looking into FusionReactor, it's sort of like watching application TV, because you can see requests coming in, you can see them being processed. If something's running slowly, you can actually see it, in real time running slowly. So you can perform a stack trace on that. So you can actually analyze it as requests are being processed. So FusionReactor measures and records all kinds of different metrics. So you've got things like web requests, web transactions. Within a web request, you can see transactional information, where it was called from, how much memory it used, how long it ran, which IP address called it, what the URL was. Then you can see things like JDBC activity. So you can see the actual SQL statements that have been executed. You can see how long those ran, how many rows were returned, how much time was actually spent on the database. You can see things like Hibernate calls. We've got support for MongoDB. You can also see fairly common feature in monitoring is something called UEM, which is user experience monitoring. And with user experience monitoring, we're actually measuring the end-to-end performance of a request. So if you're a user and you, I don't know, order some item online, we would measure the time taken for that request to be sent across the wire, to be processed at the server. We're breaking down any database-related time spent. We're measuring the request coming back to the client, and then all the client rendering time. So that gives you a really great overview from an end-to-end perspective, how much time you're actually spending. And this cuts, if you imagine, sometimes, you may have sat in some sort of war room meeting where, customers called in and said, oh, your application's performing slowly. And then there's finger pointing going off. The database guy said it's not me. The network guy saying, no, it's definitely not the network, blah, blah, blah. But with UEM, you can really see, it really graphs it up really nice so that you can see exactly where you're spending your time. So that's also included. We can also do things like session management. So we can see how many sessions were created, how many have been destroyed. We've also got very detailed JVM metrics, so we can see heap, memory utilization, CPU, obviously. We can see the different memory spaces that you've got, so PermGen or Eden. We can look and see how the garbage collector is working. There's a lot of people very interested to see how GC is running. We can actually launch a GC garbage collection cleanup from within FusionReactor. As we've sort of focused on ColdFusion over the years, we've got about, I think it's over 40 specific ColdFusion metrics that we're exposing. So things like active session counts, application scope size, hit counts, DB pool size, things like that. If you've got the Enterprise or Ultimate editions, then you've got an Enterprise dashboard, so you can see the overall health of all your servers within one window. That's very useful. Plus, we've also got a system monitor. So FusionReactor is pretty much focused within a server instance. But with the server monitor, you can actually get a view of the whole machine. So here you can see things like network and disk I/O. You can see an overview of all the processes running on your actual server. You can check for disk capacity, so FusionReactor will warn you when you're running out of disk space. We've also got a bunch of reports, so we do a daily, a weekly, and a monthly report. These can be used to see how many requests have been processed, what the HTTP codes were, what the average CPU, average database response time was. So you can really use those reports for doing service level agreement checking. That's the idea, that you can sort of get daily feedback on how your application's doing, and then that can be used for checking service level agreements. So that's all what I see as the core functionality. So how do we differentiate ourselves? How does FusionReactor differentiate itself from other monitors? It's basically in two areas. The first area is we've got something called crash protection. And crash protection is can be used when FusionReactor determines that something isn't running as it should. FusionReactor will actually take charge and try and proactively do something to keep the server alive. And this is a unique feature. I don't believe there's any other monitor that does this. And an example would be, let's say you set your memory threshold at 96%. So you can say, when my memory goes over 96% utilization, then I want FusionReactor to block any new requests which are coming into the server. And it will do that until the memory basically, catches hold of itself and then drops down into or below that threshold. Another example would be, let's say on your application, you determine that all your requests should run within 2.5 seconds. So normally you've not got any request that runs for longer than 2.5 seconds, or maybe you've got a couple of reports that run longer and those can be excluded from this check. But if any other request runs and that's longer than let's say longer than 10 seconds, then you can instruct FusionReactor to actually kill that request. So it will attempt to kill it, and if it does kill it, then it's gone. So that's the first way that we differentiate. The other thing that we do is what we've done, or the way that we think about a monitor is a monitor basically should be used to find out why something is going wrong. Very often I'll ask people, why do you need a monitor? And quite often I get the answer, I want to see what's running on my server, what is my server, what's my application doing? And that's okay, but really you're trying to find out why something is broken. Why is it performing slowly? Why is this request aborting? What's the problem and why is it occurring? And with the other way that we differentiate ourselves is we've looked at which developer tools developers would use to try and isolate issues. And like I said before, those tools are debuggers like Eclipse or Fusion Debug in the ColdFusion world. And we've got code profilers like JProfiler and memory analysis tools like JVisual VM or MAT. Will be a very common memory analysis tool. And what we've done is we've taken the best components from those tools and we've built them directly into FusionReactor. And we've made these features safe, secure, and very low overhead so that you can use them in a production environment. And nobody else has done this. But with the
isn't that really hard to do with a debugger though, David? It's when you turn on a breakpoint, it's going to stop your whole app from running for everyone on the server. Yeah. How do you get around that?
Okay, so yes, it is very, very difficult to do. So why wouldn't you use a debugger in production normally? There's two main reasons. The first reason is performance hit. And the performance hit comes from if you're attaching a debugger remotely, let's say using Eclipse, there's a debug protocol that gets passed between Eclipse and between the remote server. And it's that debug protocol that really makes the performance slow and would really degrade your production environment. And we've got around that because we're actually inside the JVM. So there's a debugger which is built into the Java virtual machine, and we're going straight at that debugger through the JVM TI, through the tools interface. So we've coded directly at it. So we don't have this protocol. So when the debugger's not running, the overhead is actually zero. And even when the debugger does run, it's really, really minimal. So we've got over that problem there. And to answer your other question, what's another problem, and you brought that one up. If you set a breakpoint in some method or some initialization class, and that breakpoint fired, or that class was called from everywhere, let's say it's some initialization thing, that breakpoint would fire. And what we've done to overcome that problem is we've actually come up with a set of control mechanisms to enable you to control how often and how a breakpoint should actually be fired in production. And we've even we've applied for a patent on that capability. So for example, we could fire a breakpoint just one time. So let's say you've got some part of your application is throwing an exception. We could say, okay, if this exception gets thrown, then I want to capture that exception, but I only want to do it one time. So for the person who was using your application on that thread, they would lose that session, but this was an exception causing an issue, so it would have crashed anyway. But the cool thing is that we would capture that, and we can hold that session for any amount of time. So you can control. You could say, okay, if a breakpoint fires, then I want to hold that breakpoint for 60 seconds, or I want to hold that breakpoint for 5 minutes, or I want to hold that breakpoint indefinitely. And there's a really neat feature that's built into the debugger. Once a breakpoint fires, FusionReactor will actually send out an email. And in that email, you can configure it so that you've got a link in the email. When you just click on the link, it takes you straight into the debugger. And that email also contains a full stack trace, as well as all the variables at the point that breakpoint was fired. So all the scope variables, which, as I'm sure you know, even having the variables at that point could easily enable you to isolate the issue. But we'll actually set a breakpoint, capture it, send it out in email, and we will hold that thread indefinitely until you go and intercept that email. So it's a really cool feature. What it means is that let's say something breaks at 2 o'clock in the morning, we'll take care of it. And when you come into work, you just basically go into your email. There's an email there. You click on the link, and you're inside that breakpoint exactly as it was happening. It's sort of like having a time machine. It's pretty amazing stuff.
Wow, that does sound like genius.
It is pretty much genius. And the other stuff's really cool too. The profiler that enables you to actually do line performance analysis of your code as it's running in production. So a profiler will enable you to isolate hotspots, so you use it for performance tuning. And with the memory profiler, the memory analyzer, that's very similar to JVisual VM, if you've seen the memory analyzer in that tool. So you'd use that. You can see, for example, all the classes which are running, how many objects they've got open, what the real-time heap utilization is. You can also do GC routes analysis, so get the garbage collection routes. So basically, you can analyze how the memory is actually being maintained and stored. And through that, it makes it very easy to do memory leak detection. So you can actually see the memory leaks appearing across time directly in FusionReactor, which is, it's really an amazing feature. And to have that available in the production environment, running with very, very low overhead and very safely and securely, we believe is a major differentiator and a major breakthrough.
Wow. Well, I know memory leaks have been a bugbear of ColdFusion server crashes for a long time. So being able to detect those like that is really cool. When you say like overhead's low, how low is the overhead? Because you've mentioned so many features. It sounds like it must take up 10% of the server CPU or whatever.
It doesn't. So FusionReactor is less than 1% overhead. And we've really, right from the outset of building FusionReactor, it's really been our goal to keep the overhead in absolutely as low as possible. And when you compare FusionReactor to some of the other monitors on the market, very often the other monitors, they're coming in at anywhere between 2 and 5% overhead. Obviously, you know, as you probably remember from O-level physics back in the day, if you measure something, then that has an effect on that thing. So you can't measure at no cost, but we really try and keep below 1% with Fusion Reactor. And I believe for the return on investment that you get, for the benefit of that monitoring capability, it's really, really worth it. You know, you do get a lot back for the cost in performance impact. You really get a lot of data back. It's incredible.
Well, and let's just talk about the cost, because it you know, you can rent this for $39 a month, right?
Right.
In one of the versions.
So
that's less than the cost of a cheap cup of coffee, a very bad cup of coffee, to be honest, for $1.30.
Yeah. So it starts at $39 a month, and we've got two ways that you can purchase a license. We've either got subscription, which is either monthly or annually, or you can purchase a license outright. So we like to give people choice. That's really what we've always been about right from the start, that, you know, different customers, some of them like to do monthly, some just want to buy the software, and we really believe we want to give people choice. So with the monthly, it starts at $39 a month. That's for Fusion Reactor Standard. And if you take a year's worth of license, then basically you get 2 months free. So it will be $390 for the annual license. And if you wanted to purchase Fusion Reactor Standard, that would cost you $999. So basically, if you're looking at it from sort of a return on investment perspective, then you can pretty much say, so if you're going to use the product for longer than, let's say, 3.5 years or over 3 years, then it's better to buy it and just keep doing the annual maintenance. And the maintenance is about 20% of the price of the software. And if you do the maintenance, then you get all the updates and all the upgrades. So we've got 3 editions: Fusion Reactor Standard, Fusion Reactor Enterprise, and Fusion Reactor Ultimate. And the developer tools that I mentioned, which are one of the key differentiators, those are included in Ultimate. Fusion Reactor Standard, you've got all the core monitoring capability. So you can see all the things that I mentioned earlier, which are part of the core functionality, is pretty much in the Standard edition. And with the Enterprise, you've got the System Monitor, you've got the Enterprise dashboard. So if you're using multiple servers, then usually people buy the Enterprise or the Ultimate edition.
Cool. So I know you're working on Fusion Reactor version 7 that's going to come out at some point in, I guess, this year. Safe to say this year, but we don't know exactly when.
Safe to say this year.
And it's currently in QA. Is that where it is? Or?
Yeah. We're currently in QA. And so some of the main features which are coming up in Fusion Reactor 7, we've got some really cool new stuff. So one thing that we've done is we've now added full support for Java management extensions, otherwise known as JMX. And this gives you the capability to monitor all kinds of applications, system objects, and those system objects are represented by something called MBeans. And this has really extended the, let's say, the metric monitoring capability vastly. So when I see all the metrics that are now available to us in JMX, it is phenomenal. You can also write your own MBeans. So what that means is you can basically you can extend Fusion Reactor essentially to monitor whatever you want. that's really a great capability. Another thing, everybody's heard of AWS, so Amazon Web Services. It's probably the most popular platform for hosting applications in the cloud. And AWS also has a monitoring service, and that monitoring service is called AWS CloudWatch. And CloudWatch enables you to capture metrics, to visualize them into graphs. You can build dashboards. You can also do alerting. And with the advent of Fusion Reactor 7, we've included the capability to link Fusion Reactor's standard metrics, so all the metrics that we analyze, plus all the MBeans, all the JMX metrics, and we've enabled the ability to push those metrics up to AWS CloudWatch. And I don't believe there's any other product which is doing this, especially for JMX. I know you can. There's I found some software on Git where you could sort of, take it and do a bit of do-it-yourself push up to CloudWatch. But this capability enables Fusion Reactor to basically become a sort of a broker, really, to glue together JMX metric processing and AWS CloudWatch. So it's just so simple. It's literally, click, 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 add to CloudWatch, and then when you go into your CloudWatch account, you've instantly got all these metrics available. So without really doing very much, all you need is Fusion Reactor in the middle, and all that capability is included. We've also done some enhancements with the debugger. So we've got a great feature now. I call it the one-click breakpoint. So one feature, I didn't actually mention it before, but within the debug capability, Fusion Reactor can decompile your code on the fly, which is pretty amazing. And it's so quick at doing it. So if you're running something and you've not deployed the source code, you can just go into Fusion Reactor, set a breakpoint, or if there's an exception, let's say you've got an HTTP 500 error, you can drill into that, click decompile, boom, and all the code is decompiled, and you can literally just go into you see your code on the screen. You can just go in and click next to the point in your code where you want to set that breakpoint, and Fusion Reactor will set you a breakpoint, just like you could do in Eclipse or in Fusion Debug. And once you've got that, the next time that code runs, it will automatically break at that point. And like I said before, you've got then this capability. It will, by default, it will only halt it one time, so it's just going to halt on one thread. But it is amazing when you see it and you see how fast it is to be able to, go straight into your production code, set a breakpoint, and just go in and debug it on the fly in production with minimal overhead. It's pretty amazing. What else have we got? We've also got, I mentioned before, the memory profiler. So to check out the heap utilization. That's a Fusion Reactor 7 feature. So I'm talking about it because I'm already using it, and I've been playing with that a lot. It is just amazing. It was interesting. I tried to bring up on my test environment. I tried to bring up JVisual VM just to see what the difference was in the views between JVisual VM and between Fusion Reactor running in the same environment, and it just wouldn't work. I just couldn't get JVisual VM to launch on my production system. And in the meantime, I'd got a couple of applications running in the background, and just with our memory analyzer running, not a problem at all. So it was running very, very happily, as fast as ever. I didn't notice any performance degradation. It just runs. And that's where I've got it's hats off to the development team. They've done an amazing job with that, which was a very, very, very difficult thing to do. Also with the debugger and the profiler, these are really very, very difficult problems to break, and those guys have done a really excellent job with that.
That is great, and I know, because I've been involved in this stuff for a long time, and getting the debugger to work on production is pretty amazing. So, yeah. And I'm excited about all these new memory things, because often servers crash because memory is leaking or your heap has got messed up.
Yes, so. It does. Yeah, memory is very, very often a culprit. So yeah, that's going to be good.
So I was looking through the FusionReactor website before we got on this interview for the podcast, and I noticed that you're now in the cloud. Why did you do that?
Right. So why did we move up into the cloud? Well, we've been, so just a little bit of background. So the cloud's been running. We started as a closed beta towards the end of 2015. And then we started moving customers who were on that beta as basically as paying customers around about summer 2016. And since then, we've been gradually moving customers onto the cloud. Why did we do it? So there's a number of reasons. As I mentioned to you before, we've always strived to keep FusionReactor very low overhead, and to keep the information. So basically, we didn't want to store information onto the local disk. We do store log files onto the disk, which there's a rotation system which will move them off and back them up. But we didn't want to start storing a load of information locally. So one of the reasons for bringing in the cloud is so that we can capture data and push that data up to the cloud and have that data stored and maintained so that we can analyze it, aggregate it, and then make it available to our customers through the cloud interface. So FusionReactor, as it's running normally, the graphs that you can see will basically, you can see live view, you can see the last hour, or you can see up to a week's worth of data. And that data is actually stored in memory. It's very optimally stored, but it is stored in memory. And again, we try and keep that amount of data as small as possible, but with the advent of the cloud, we can look at data across a longer period of time. Another reason is FusionReactor basically is it's focused at a server instance. Now, if you've got, let's say you've got a cluster and that cluster's got 6 servers on it, it'd be great to be able to see, and let's say you've just got one application running on that cluster. It'd be great to see how is my application performing. And again, with the advent of the cloud, you can do that. So you can say, okay, I've got FusionReactor on these 6 instances, and I'm going to group these instances together, and I'm going to give myself an application view. And that's also a really great thing when you're trying to look at the performance of the application to see how the application is performing as a whole and not just as an individual instance. Yeah, so yeah, that's one of the reasons.
So does this also tie in with Fusion Analytics, or?
Well, Fusion Analytics is still there, and that's not going away. Fusion Analytics gives you some additional features. So Fusion Analytics, it's actually performing much more analysis on the data. So the idea with Fusion Analytics was also to be able to store data across a longer period of time. And you can actually store much more data with Fusion Analytics. You're not bound to the amount of data that we're storing in the cloud. You can actually, as long as you've got enough disk space and a big enough database, and just to be clear, the database that we ship with for Fusion Analytics can store up to 10 gigabytes. So it's the Microsoft, I can't remember what it's called now, It's basically it's the free engine that's delivered with Microsoft SQL Server, which can store up to 10 gig. If you wanted to store more data, then you'd need the full Microsoft SQL Server license. And then it's up to you. You can store a week or a month or 6 months or a year, however much data you like. And Fusion Analytics will consume that data. It analyzes it. I think there's about, it must be about at least 150 different reports and graphs and tables which are analyzing all your data. And sort of the way that, certainly the way that some customers have looked at it is that Fusion Analytics is sort of like the cloud. It's giving you more information actually in many respects, at least in terms of analysis of the actual data, but they don't need to use the cloud. So it's an on-premise solution. So some of our customers aren't able to use the cloud, or they don't want to use the cloud. And for those guys, Fusion Analytics is still a really great option. And on the cloud side, I was just going to wrap up. So one of the other key differentiators it has, which Fusion Analytics doesn't have, is Fusion Reactor Cloud has got a really amazing alerting engine. And that alerting engine enables you to take all the different metrics that Fusion Reactor is analyzing, and you can create alerts out of those metrics. And we've got full integration with a number of different alerting services. So for example, we've got PagerDuty, we've got Slack, we've got HipChat, we've got VictorOps, we've got Twilio. You can do integration with regular email, of course. You've got HTTP hooks, so you can link into some sort of URL to generate an alert. There's really a lot of capability in the alerting engine. So, and as we move forward with that, we're going to be pushing much more data as we're analyzing what's going on in your server. We're going to be pushing that data up to the cloud. So Fusion Reactor Cloud also shows you a lot of the same information that you've already got on Fusion Reactor on-premise. Obviously not everything, but you can see, for example, you can see stack traces, slow running requests, you can see your resources, memory and CPU, all that stuff as well. And it's actually, in comparison to other cloud services, which don't, it's sort of, they're all one way. Fusion Reactor is actually two-way. So we've got a secure bidirectional link between Fusion Reactor Cloud and your local instance or your local Fusion Reactor service. And we can actually, from the cloud, generate a stack trace or run a garbage collection directly from the cloud. And the performance is phenomenal. It really is. It's amazing to watch. It's, you know, it really is sort of instantaneous response time. So yeah, that's really exciting for us.
Wow, that's cool.
Yeah.
So I'm kind of curious, what versions of Adobe ColdFusion and Lucy does Fusion Reactor work with these days?
Okay, so Fusion Reactor 6 works with ColdFusion 8, 9, 10, 11, 2016. We've also, if you've got ColdFusion 6.1 or 7MX, you can still get copies of Fusion Reactor 4.5, and those will work very happily with those older versions of ColdFusion if you've still got them. We support Rilo 3X everything and 4X everything, and then we've got support for Lucy 4.5 and Lucy 5. And we need to be a little bit careful as Lucy sort of has evolved and is bringing out new versions. We just had a recent issue with a compatibility issue between Fusion Reactor and a very new version of Lucy. But what I can say is that we're working very closely with the Lucy Foundation, and we're working very closely with Adobe, the ColdFusion team. And our goal is always to make sure that we always support the latest versions of both Adobe ColdFusion and Lucy. So we're very committed.
Great. So what's your development roadmap for the next year?
So, like I said, we're working on Fusion Reactor 7 now, and actually launching. So openly launching cloud. You can buy it today if you contact sales. You can purchase a cloud license, or you can also do. You can try it out. So we can happily give you a trial of Fusion Reactor Cloud. But if you go onto the website, you can't actually buy it because we've not got the official launch yet. So we're going to be doing that this year, launching Fusion Reactor 7, which is the next major release. Then for the coming year, our focus is going to be on more intelligent analysis of data. So we're trying to analyze the data that we're collecting and interpreting and coming up with answers why something is broken. We always, when we started with Fusion Reactor, we always imagined this big green button. We called it the big that, you push the big green button, it tells you exactly what the problem is. And I think the future is, it sort of is going in that direction. We're trying to interpret the data and really assist you to isolate and locate your problems as fast as possible. So, we're really trying to speed up issue identification. In the cloud, we're going to be working on improved collaboration. A lot more alerting is planned, and also log analysis. So capturing logs, sending that log information from Fusion Reactor up into the cloud so that we can analyze it there. We're also, if people are interested in that, we're also working on adding monitoring support for Node.js. So we've already got sort of a working prototype of Node.js. So that's something that's going on in the background.
Wow, lots of exciting stuff coming up. So as well as a mountain of exciting things it already does. So.
Yeah.
So I know you support a lot of conferences in ColdFusion and Java around the world. Why do you do that?
Well, we've been sponsoring ColdFusion events, I think from 2005 or 2006. And I think in the ColdFusion world, I think most people have heard of us. It does happen that somebody comes up in an event and says, I've never heard of Fusion Reactor. But at the ColdFusion events is what I'm talking about here. But I think that, we see sponsorship as a chance to support and give something back to the ColdFusion community. There's not hundreds of companies who are really, doing ColdFusion stuff. And I think if those companies didn't support, then it would be, it'd make things worse for ColdFusion. And, we really see it as a chance to give back and to make sure that those events and conferences keep on happening and keep on serving the community. So that's basically why we do it. And like I said, we're doing more Java-focused events. So we were at DevNexus in Atlanta in February. We're going to be sponsoring Velocity in San Jose in June, and also Velocity in London in October, I think. So Velocity is sort of a conference in and around DevOps and monitoring. That's very much sort of a monitoring event, but also there's a lot of guys go there and gals who are doing Java.
Cool. Well, appreciate you supporting all these conferences and the ColdFusion and Java communities.
Yeah, and
So,
it's also a great. It's for me personally. It's a great opportunity to meet up with customers. So a lot of times it's familiar faces that come up. It's nice to see people again, and maybe we just see each other once a year. But also to get feedback about the product. We're always very, very open to feedback, what people think about it, and how we can improve it. And we also see the conferences as a great way to interact with customers and to get that feedback. So that's very important for me personally, and for the job that I do for the company.
So why are you proud to use ColdFusion in your company? You've used it for years, right?
Why are we proud? I think I've got to go back to 1997, and
wow.
We were actually developing what at the time was the largest web application development in the world for Hewlett-Packard. It was a big document management system which they wanted to roll out to all their sales reps and distributors globally. And we were building it, and we'd actually selected a different technology. It was called Lystra, and it doesn't exist anymore. But at the time, it was sort of like a scripting language, somewhat similar to ColdFusion, based on the Informix database. And we just got problems with it. We put this software on. It was it was a mid-size server from HP, and it was performing terribly. It was just really bad. And it was sort of looking like we weren't going to be able to complete this project. And we made a decision then. We weren't really getting anywhere with Lystra. And Darren Hywell, our CTO, my partner, he said one day, Dave, we've got to look for something else. If we carry on with the Lystra, we're in trouble. And he went away and came back. He was gone over the weekend and came back on Monday and said, Dave, I've found this software. It could save us. And that software was ColdFusion. And this was version 2. And I said, okay. And he said, the most amazing thing is, he said it's gonna have to run on an NT box. So, and this was a time, you can imagine, at HP, nobody was running enterprise applications on NT boxes. This, unheard of. Everybody was like, it had to be some whatever K-class server or something, some big HP UX box. And we came along with ColdFusion, and so I remember telling HP management, oh, this is going to run on NT. And they sort of looked at me like I'd gone crazy. And anyway, we ported it, the task of porting it. It wasn't too difficult. We actually did it over Christmas. All the team went away, and I was included as well. I'd not developed for a while. I was managing the project, but I got whatever. I had to do all the admin screens. So I was the admin conversion guy. And I remember coding on Christmas Day, in between eating my turkey and Christmas Eve. And we just coded, and then we came back after Christmas and put all this code together, and it just worked. It was pretty amazing, really. And that made me very, very proud to use ColdFusion. And we've been fans ever since. And we built a ton of stuff on CF. It was really great. And that's sort of what brought us to developing FusionReactor, because, as you know, you went back into late 1999, or even when we started with FusionReactor back in 2005. ColdFusion was very much a black box. You couldn't see inside it. And that's why we developed FusionReactor, to enable you to get inside the code, see what it's doing, and do all the great stuff that we're doing with it. So that's why I'm proud. Yeah, proud to support ColdFusion, and it gets a bad rap, and of course it's a legacy technology now, but it's still a great language.
Wow, great answer. I can tell how really excited you are using ColdFusion there at Integral. So what would it take for ColdFusion to be even more alive this year?
I think the community is definitely key. I think, by the way, it's great what you're doing with the CF Alive talks. That's something which hopefully generates interest. Obviously, the events are important. So there's been a number of ColdFusion events this year. So there was Into the Box, which was auto solutions. There's going to be CFObjective, which was actually DevObjective, but they've gone back to CFObjective this year, which is going to be in Washington in July. Then we've got CF Summit coming up in November, so the Adobe CF Summit, which is in Vegas. There's also going to be CF Camp, which is in Germany, in Europe, the great event that we always sponsor. So community is important. The events are important. I think it's also Adobe that's also got to put the word out, and try and spread the sort of the ColdFusion message more, potentially more at universities, so that more people who are studying computer science maybe get some exposure to ColdFusion, and that they see that actually it is a great language. I'm sure that would help. So yeah, that's what I think can be done to keep ColdFusion alive. Obviously, we are very strongly behind ColdFusion. We're supporting Adobe CF, and from a product perspective as well. Obviously, we're supporting Rilo and Lucy, and also Blue Dragon. I don't know whether anybody still uses Blue Dragon.
I think a few % of people are still using it, at least in the ColdFusion survey we did a few months ago.
So FusionReactor also runs on Blue Dragon. So
great. Well, thanks for all your support of ColdFusion, David, and keep doing the amazing new features at FusionReactor, which helps keep ColdFusion servers running reliably and fast. So,
okay, we'll try. Keep on going.
Great. Well, and thanks for being on the podcast.
Okay, no problem at all. Nice talking to you, Michael. Thank you.